Hi, we're going to discuss the Concerto Grosso today. And at the end of this, hopefully, we give you basic terminology, basic idea of forms. You can define what a Concerto Grosso is, and you have an idea of how to approach listening to a Concerto Grosso. So, the first thing you need to know about Concerto Grosso is that it is a multi movement work. What that means is it has multiple sections that seem like they're entire pieces unto themselves. They start, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They pause, usually, and then they go on to another movement or another piece. And similar to the suite having a bunch of short dances put together, these have more moderately length movements or pieces put together to combine a larger whole. I said that they usually stop between movements, and that's true, although in the Baroque period, sometimes in the middle of one of these, a slow movement would go, and then at the end, instead of stopping, it would pause on the actual notes without silence for a second, and then immediately launch into another movement. But most of the movements stop and pause. Okay, so it's a multi-movement work, all right, and it's for it'd be for Baroque orchestra, which could just be strings, although and continuo like a harpsichord. However, often they would have woodwinds or brass or something with them, but it's sort of on an ad hoc basis. Okay, and small group. So, and what would happen is the Baroque orchestra would play, and then the small group would play, and they go back and forth. And the contrast of medium large group versus small group was something that they were interested in juxtaposing and showing. This contrasting in a way is a form of love of drama. Um, and the multi-movement works themselves would have tempos that might go like fast, slow, fast. Although, as much as your textbook would like to say that there's three movements in one of these, in the Baroque period, especially in the early part, you could have 4, 5, even 6 movement um, um, concertos. But towards the end of the Baroque period, it evolves and sort of congeals down to an idea of fast, slow, fast, or three movements, and they liked that. The other thing is it has a main theme. And remember, a theme is like an extended melody, okay, that has a special name called ritornello. And if you think of a ritornello as a chorus or a refrain, and so this gets stated at the beginning of the piece of music. It's played through entirely, and usually it's like I said, it's longer than just a short tune. It'll have maybe a part one and part two to it, and then the orchestra or the small group will go away and play something else, and then when they've explored that, it comes back to the theme again. And so the way we listen to concertos, Concerto Grosso, okay, is that we learn the theme first. And it's usually tuneful and a lot of fun to listen to. And it's presented right away. And then we enjoy the diversions that the music takes to other themes or areas of music. And then it comes back again and again and again. And sometimes it will be moved from major to minor, or you'll get a variation on it, again, just for interest's sake right there. Now, the Concerto Grosso. Well, there's actually Concerto Grosso and Concerto Solo. And all it just means is Baroque orchestra plus a group of soloists. So grosso means larger than one, I guess. And Baroque orchestra plus a soloist, a single soloist. During the Baroque period, there was much more interest in this. And And we'll see a piece of music in your book that does that. That's the Brandenburg Concerto number 5, where it's contrasting a small group of players versus a larger group, the ensemble large. And then we'll look at Spring by Vivaldi, which is sort of solo and sort of grosso because it is a small orchestra versus the violinist, but there is a secondary violinist from the group that comes in and duets with them, and you'll hear that. And so it's kind of this weird hybrid, and we'll talk about why Vivaldi does that, because he's a little different than most people. All right, so with that in mind, um, let me. Let me screen share, and hopefully by using just a little bit of the mind tap, and I'm talking about just a little bit, um, we won't get flagged by YouTube. But if that's the case, I'll put this video up just inside Canvas. I mean, we're fine under fair use to play just a fragment, but the algorithms don't always know that. So here's the main theme of the Brandenburg Concerto number 5. And you have a listening guide right here. And it's like, let's see, the D key piano. It's too high for me to whistle, but you get that idea. It goes on and finishes up to the cadence. You can kind of see there's a first segment and a second segment, like we were talking about. And here it is, right at the very beginning of the piece. I'm sorry, for some reason that wants to queue up from there. Let's try again. There we go. So you can hear that theme, and once it's done playing this, it'll go right into the small ensemble, which will have something different to do. You can hear right away the flute and a couple of violins and things exchange melody lines and stuff. So we learn to do this now. Like I said, the more I play copyrighted recordings, the more chance that YouTube will flag it, even though we're fine with that. It comes with the text, and we're only playing a small bit of it. But your job should be to listen to the first 20 seconds of this and get to really, really know the theme, so you can sing along with it, so that it's comfortable and something that you enjoy. And then when you listen through the piece, you'll hear when it comes back again and again and again. Okay, so listening for the ritornello, and then hearing departures and things that go away. Now, if you were a music major and had 2 years of music theory underneath your belt, and you were in a form class, we'd get into this in great detail and look at actual music and see that that the alternating sections that are different from the ritornello or main theme, um, have the returning theme, have been put into different keys, or sometimes they switch from major to minor. Sometimes they have interesting textures that have been applied to them. It's a place where you have contrast musically, and these things become possible because um, of all the innovations or evolutions of music that culminated in the Baroque period of music. For instance, because we have a more sophisticated tuning system that allows us to play in different keys, which means that we can sustain longer pieces of music by having pieces of music like this travel section by section through different keys. It's not haphazard either. If we were looking directly in the score and listening and doing a deep analysis, we'd find that depending on where you start, there's a satellite area of maybe 5 or 6 other keys that it would go to. That means scales that we use in tonal centers. In other words, they start with home, the D, and then they would, I don't think it's the D anymore. And then depending on where it went, it might go to A, or it might go to G, or it might go to B minor. There are certain places that are like a neighborhood for this. So we have the ability to play in those keys because our tuning system allows that. We also have had a system of harmony that's evolved into specific chords and progressions or patterns of chords that seem to work for our ears and how to get from one key to another. So we have a more sophisticated way of crafting the music, and we have a much more sophisticated, in fact, basically the modern notation system, which allows us to write down longer pieces, great many different things with intricate parts and things like that. So all of these culminate together, right? So there's that. You should listen to this on MindTap, many times to recognize it, so that you become familiar with the alternate pieces. And the more you do, the more you will enjoy this piece of music, because there's so many different layers of texture, color, juxtaposition of themes, terrace dynamics, those kind of things. The ways that the ritornello transforms and comes back, and even in here towards the end, there's what we call a cadenza, which is a place where the music stops towards the very end. And I think in this case, the harpsichordist gets to sort of noodle around and make up interesting sort of variations and sort of improvisations on thematic materials. And that will be good to know about, because we'll see that in the classical period as an important feature of concertos for the soloists that come up. Okay, all right. So there's that. Now I just want to introduce you to the same concepts again with Vivaldi's Spring. Vivaldi is another composer that's important during this time. He's a prolific writer. Um, he he's a little weird though, compared to other composers in how he writes things, and it's fine because it shows us an evolution as well as we go away from the Baroque into the classical period. Like, why did things change? Well, normal reasons. So the Spring is one of four um, concertos that he wrote, each one for each age or sorry, each season of the year. And he actually imbues or puts lines of a poem throughout the piece of music, and he writes music that depicts that kind of sound. So the first line is "Spring with all its happiness is here," and then later, after the main theme is done, it's like, "And the birds welcome it with happy songs," and then the brooks, touched by the breeze, flow with sweet murmurings, and all the way through. There's a storm, there's lightning. Eventually, the birds come back after the storm goes away. Um, so this is weird for this time period. We don't normally see composers imbue their music with extra musical meaning. In other words, music doesn't depict in this period of time exactly like a narrative of a story or non-musical ideas. Usually you just get like a concerto in A major or sonata in F or something like that, like you've seen already. The first one is called the Brandenburg Concerto because of who Bach wrote these for. So it got that name in that way, but he didn't think of them to begin with that way. It would have just been dedicated to Brandenburg. The reason that Vivaldi is doing this, I think, is because, well, he has to write lots and lots of music. If we go to his biography, you're going to find that he was the music teacher at an orphanage for girls, and what that meant was that he taught music every day to all the children that were there, and he would write for concerts that they would give on a weekly basis, and he'd rehearse and such. And it became something of a funny thing in that they were so talented and so popular, people would come to see them, but at the same time, it was sort of it's like a social shame for the city to have so many orphaned children there as well. But he had to write and write and write and write and write. He wrote, like, goes Um, he's a prolific composer, enormous amount of music, many works for the girls of the play, including concertos for violin, about 300 of them, right? And then 450 pieces and more and all. And, if you're writing and writing and writing, several things happen. You have to come up with your next idea. It's easy to come up with like a couple small cartoons or jokes or content for YouTube if you're writing that, but come back in a year or two when you've had to do like 100 or 200, and you just have to brainstorm all the time. And so two things happen from that. Vivaldi is pushed into interesting places because he's so prolific and because there's a need. And so that's part of the reason why he has this spring extra musical ideas, poems that he sets these things to, because he's going like, what am I going to write next? Well, okay, I could do four concertos about the seasons, and he's going, great, that's my next month right there. I can write that. And so there's that. The other thing is, because he's working with the same people, and he's writing so many you know pieces of music for them to perform on concerts and things like that. And he's teaching them all, and he has them all steady for the years while they're there. He develops many virtuoso players. Everybody's great. And so another thing that's a little strange um, spring, and I'm not saying other concertos are easy to play, because it's hard to play this music at a high level, but usually concertos, I've smudged this all, but if you think about this, it's contrasting. Concerto Grosso or solo is a group, right, versus the soloist, right? Right now, soloist would be solo concerto, and the group of them would be soloists. And this is Concerto Grosso or Concerto Solo. Um, and the juxtaposition of the size of the instruments and things like that, like the groups, big group versus little group, or big group versus soloist, was the point of the piece. But with him, since he knows that he's got to write piece after piece after piece after piece, and he's got all these great musicians that he's been training up from the time they were very young, he'd be like, I'll just write this like this and this and this. And normally, composers, we have to say, we think about who's going to perform the music. Can we do this? Is this not possible? When I ran the choir at the college for about a decade or so, I wrote a good 60-70% of the music that we did there, and I'd always be thinking about who's the soloist, what can we do, is our alto section strong enough, and I tailor it for that. It's a real concern. Well, he would say, this is really difficult, and then you go like, that's okay, I've got so and so and so and so and so and so that can all play this. Or he'd say like, if I do this, this will be really flashy and amazing, and then the other people in the ensemble won't have to learn quite as difficult a part. Anyhow, the point is that concertos in the Baroque period typically didn't say easy, super difficult, but in the case of Spring, it is, and because it's not because he's trying to change the genre or something, but out of necessity of writing so many pieces, he innovates, and he starts to move outside of the norms of writing styles, because he just, that's where he's going to go, out of necessity for writing, and out of just because he's exhausted all these other possibilities. So we have, I guess, a couple terms that you want to know. Well, maybe the one term. It's called program music. So because he's written this to mean a poem or represent that, it's music with a program or a non-musical allusion or reference. Um, Here's the thing. In the Baroque period, that's also weird. We just don't do that very much. Vivaldi is one of the few people to do that. Later, this will become so common in the end of the classical period and in the romantic period, that almost everybody will be writing music about something other than music. But in the meantime, this is an anomaly. And so there could be a test question for you saying, like, which of the followings are true about Vivaldi's Spring? And so you should know that, first off, the fact that it's about something non-musical, program music, is odd for the time. And the fact that the soloist parts are so difficult, or virtuosic to play, that's also anomalous for the time. Okay, so let me go over and get the spring here. Now, again, we could get flagged here and stuff, and if that's the case, I'll put this also up on the Canvas site. But when we listen to this, the reason this is in here is because, you know, you're going like, why would they put this in a textbook if it's got all these things that don't match up with the typical sort of, you know, attributes of a concerto? It's super famous. As soon as you hear this, you'll go like, oh, I've heard this as background for music and commercials and things like that. So this ritornello or returning theme is a big deal. So it's like bum 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 ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum bum bum ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum ba-da-dum bum 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 bum. And then it will repeat it again with terrace dynamics that are really quiet, so loud versus quiet. And then the second half will be bum bum ba-da-dum bum bum bum, bum bum ba-da-dum bum bum bum, bum bum bum, bum bum ba-da-dum ba-da-dum, and then it'll repeat that again using your your terrace dynamics of loud versus quiet. And the reason I'm singing these to you before I play the music in both cases is so that first off you'll have it in your ears and sort of have your attention focused on it. And secondly, if YouTube makes us clip that part out, then you still have that there. Okay, at least in context of the video, and you'll go back and listen as well. So here we go. And so that's our first theme. And you can hear the terrace dynamics. It's just a repeat. You can hear the harpsichord filling in and improvising the continual part in the second half. And then again repeated quietly. And there's your soloist with duetting with another player. And they're the birds that go on there, and you should listen through that whole of it. I'll just let you know that on the listening test, there will be a question that asks you, play any part of this and say, what part of the poem are we in right now? And you need to know it well enough. Another thing that's easy to hear in this piece is the bass line going bum, 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 bum. That's super simple, but it's very prominent. And we talked about continuo, right? That idea of, I'll get out of the screen share so you can see this better, of this continuo, which is an accompaniment part. Whoa, camera. There we go. Sort of an accompaniment part played by either sustaining bass instruments and the harpsichord. It's a bass line given. So remember that prominent bass line is a feature of Baroque music. I just want to explain this term. This is called basso continuo, which means the continuous bass or the bass line throughout. And that's something you hear here in the spring, because it's just a single note that's pulsing, but it's very prominent, and that stabilizes the harmony and the tempo and so many things. So continuo is short for basso continuo, which means continuous bass line or bass line throughout is prominently featured, and it is played by harpsichord, sometimes lute, because it is another chording instrument, although harpsichord's more popular. I'll put lute in there as well. Okay, and then bass instruments as well. It's just another feature that we listen for. I'm bringing this up and highlighting this because knowing your terms will be important, right? And there's a good idea or feature of it right there.